Hi guys, and welcome back to another day. This afternoon I'm sat at home and I was just editing a couple of images that I took last year up in a foggy woodland that was just around the corner from me. You guys have probably heard of this technique before, but it's called the Orton effect, and I thought I would share with you guys how I do it and how it works on an image like this. And so yeah, let's dive into Lightroom. We're going to process this image from start to finish through Lightroom and then into Photoshop and applying Gaussian blur and the levels adjustment and creating that Orton effect in Photoshop at the end. So we'll dive straight into Lightroom and yeah, let's crack on. So this is an image I took last year in a woodland just around the corner from me. It's very dense, it works really nice in fog. You could definitely film a horror film up there. It is an amazing location. Very hard to photograph. I struggled quite a few times. I'll link a couple of videos just here actually because I've been there a couple of times. And now we're in Lightroom. The first thing I would always do is scroll straight down to the bottom, remove chromatic aberration and enable profile corrections. And it differs from each image really. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's more to your personal preference and what looks good to your eye. So now back up to the top. As you can see, the image is very blue. This is the raw file. First thing I would do is just check focus. So this main tree here was my point of focus, and I was at f4.5 at 70mm ISO 50 for 1.3 second exposure. So when I focus on this tree, it's going to be dead sharp. There's no movement, and as you can see, just behind the background is thrown out lovely into the mist. But wanted to make sure that this is dead sharp, and it is. You can see all these cobwebs down here. As you can see, it would work really well for a horror film up there at that time of year. It's creepy. Anyway, I digress. First thing, highlights. A lot of people just tend to go highlights down, shadows up, whites up, blacks down, and they have some really horrible contrasty image, and you see this all the time on Instagram. Try not to do that, although there are videos that tell you to do that. Be very delicate, and small adjustments is definitely the way to adjust and to edit your images. So with highlights, we've got a very bright highlights at the back here. We've got very bright highlights, and if we drop that too much, we're going to start to see these trees and we're going to start to lose that mist. So I can just show you now, if I drop it too much, you can see it looks okay, but it starts to go a bit flat, but you can start to see the trees here, you can start to see it, but we've kind of lost that mist. So double click on highlights to reset, and just be very careful with it. We don't want it to blow out like it is here, but we want to just drop it down enough so that we can start to see it but not lose the mist, and somewhere around about -70 will do. Shadows is quite well exposed. There's nothing really very dark that we can pull out. We could lift it a little bit for this bit here maybe. Let's pull it up a little bit, maybe +15ish, that sort of area. Yeah, that'll do. And I was mainly looking in the darker areas like here then. Everything else is pretty well exposed. Whites and blacks, quick little tip, hold down Alt and then click on your slider. It will turn everything black, and then when you slide the slider to the right, you're increasing the whites, and everything now that you're seeing is starting to get blown out, so all these whites have been blown out here, so we don't want that. Pull it back. We just want to maybe just start to creep through with the whites, just to blow them out just the tiniest bit, and then we'll just pull back. There we go, somewhere around about there, +2, like it barely needed touching. Same with the blacks. Pull down to the left, and as the blacks start to come through, just go back up a little bit, -40, and I'm just going to lift them up a little bit more and crush them, because I don't really like blacks. I'd rather them look as natural as possible, and it's just starting to blow out just down here and in here. So that's at -24. Now to the Presence tab, Texture and Clarity and Dehaze. We don't want to dehaze because we like that fog and that mist that we have in the background. Very rarely touch the texture and the clarity sliders. We could add a little bit of texture, and it would add a little bit of sharpness into the bark of the tree here that we have, as you can see. And again with the clarity slider, just a touch, just adds a little bit of sharpness in there. You don't want to be too extreme because it can look horrible, so we'll just keep it at about +7, that'll do. Vibrance and saturation, I very rarely touch it. This was shot on the Sony. and the Sony sensor, that's quite a mouthful, Sony sensor is very vibrant and saturated, so I'd always tend to pull it back, but I'm quite happy with this bluey colour that we have in this woodland scene. It kind of adds that mystical fairy tale sort of scene, sort of look to the image, and I quite like that, so I'm going to leave vibrance and saturation alone. Next we're going to slide down HSL tab. Again, quite like the colours. I like the dark browns and the oranges in the bark. I like the bluey sort of colour that we have in the mist as the sun's starting to come up, so I'm not going to worry about touching any of that. Down to the sharpness and noise reduction. Very rarely need to touch noise reduction, especially when you properly expose the image, low ISOs, and get it right in camera. It's only very, very dark scenes when you push shadows a lot that you need to work on the noise reduction. So sharpening, click this little icon up here just to the left, and it adjusts the detail zoom area by clicking in the photo. So we're going to click on that, and we're going to head to where we focused, and I focused on this tree, so I'm going to put it around about there. Always add a touch of sharpening, around about 50, 58, 60, somewhere around about there. And then with the masking tool, same like we did with the whites and the blacks, hold down Alt, click on masking, slide it across. Now everything in the scene that is white is being sharpened, everything that's black is not. If we were to leave it like that and not touch the masking, everything in this photo is now being sharpened, and we don't want that. So hold down Alt, click on masking, scroll across, and obviously that main tree is our main focus. Everything else is kind of just thrown off into the background, so we want to just have the majority of that white on that bark of that tree, somewhere around about there. And then you can see with your eyes, it just softly just throws off into nothing. Don't worry about noise reduction. Scroll down, we could add a little vignette, maybe around about -7. And that looks good. That's all I would really do in Lightroom. Now I'm going to head down to the image here, right click and press edit in Adobe Photoshop. Okay, so now that the image is opened in Photoshop, the first thing we're going to do is head over to our layer, and we are going to duplicate this layer. So right click and duplicate, and we'll create a copy just like that. And it's just sat on top of the other one just here. Now we're going to add that Orton effect and soften out the background and make it look even more ethereal, and it works fantastic with woodland images like this. So up to filter, scroll down to where it says blur, cross, Gaussian blur. And you're probably thinking it's blown it all out and blurred it, and we can't really use that image. And you'd be right, but we're going to change the amount of blur that we want, somewhere around about 20, maybe 21, that sort of area, and click OK. And it differs on each image that you use to how much Gaussian blur you would apply. And then we are going to go down to the bottom and add a levels layer. We're going to make our blacks blacker by using this histogram just up here, and we're going to bring our whites and make them even brighter and blow them out. Next step is we are going to join those layers together. So we're going to shift, click on them both, and then merge those two layers together. So now we have one layer on top of our original shot, and that is at 100% opacity. And to get that Orton effect and that like nice soft blur, we're going to drop that opacity down to nothing, down to 0 on that layer. And then we're just going to slowly bring it up and just watch the image. It just starts to soften. Those blacks add contrast to the image, the whites nice up here, somewhere around about 25, 30. Just softens this all back and looks really, really nice, somewhere around about there. Plus 32 opacity, and we're going to leave it like that. But now the issue is we have our Gaussian blur, our Orton effect applied to the main bark of this tree here in the foreground here, and it kind of looks a bit strange. It kind of looks like I've missed focus. Okay, so what we can do now is add a layer mask and actually get rid of the Gaussian blur and the Orton effect that is on the bark of this tree and in and around the foreground just here. So we're going to add a layer mask just here like that. And we're going to select our brush tool by pressing B. It's already selected. And we're going to head to black, make sure it is black. I'm going to pick up my Wacom tablet pen, and we're going to have a nice soft opacity, somewhere around about 40, that'll do. Flow's fine, and we're going to start to paint away the Orton effect and reveal the sharper original image that is underneath. So we have our layer mask here, and we're just getting rid of some of this effect and revealing the original image underneath, just like so. And as you can see, as I start to paint, you can see just here it starts to go black, and that means that we're pulling through and we're getting rid of that Orton effect on the image. I've got my Wacom's tablet set up so that if I push harder with my pen, more paint is put down or erased, if that makes sense. So the harder I push, the more it's going to erase. And we're just going to make our brush a little bit smaller. We're going to go up the bark because we want that to be nice and sharp. Pushing reasonably hard. We don't have to be too worried about going over the edges, because on this image in particular there's nothing really behind it. It's just nice and soft, and we want that soft look. Nice big brush. Make sure all this foreground is nicely sharp, just like so, and very lightly blending it in so that no one would know. It just adds that mist and that fog and makes it look even more mystical and fairy tale like. And that's the beautiful thing about this Orton effect. Somewhere around about there. So the next step would be to clean up the image. I'm happy with how the exposure is. I could blacken down the blacks a little bit actually. We could do that. So right click, and we're going to merge those layers together because we're happy with that. I'm just going to add another levels layer and just blacken the blacks ever so slightly. I'm going to go to the extreme, and then with the tablet paint in what I want and what I like. I'm not going to touch the highlights. I'm going to leave it somewhere like that. Press Ctrl I to invert the mask, and as you can see it's gone black just over here. Press B to select our brush tool again, and now with the tablet we're going to make sure that we've selected white, because over here it's black because we've inverted it. And now when we, it's selected, and now when we paint with our white brush we're going to be pulling through that levels adjustment that we just did. So with a nice big brush, reasonably low opacity, 40 is fine. And now we're just going to start to paint in that darker levels that we just had, just to add a little bit more contrast in the foreground here. As you can see, the harder I push, the more that starts to come through. You can see just over here that white being pulled through is that level underneath, and we're just pulling through that darker levels layer that we had, just to add a little bit more contrast to the image. Just drop the size of our brush and a little bit more shadows into the bark of our tree here, and it just adds a bit more contrast so that we can make that bark look even sharper, just like so. We don't want to go too much. Back to a nice big brush, and it works really well because this is our main focus right here in front and this main tree. I'm not really fussed about the background, that can just blow out into nothing, into the fog, into the mist. And that's all I'd really do with that. Now we are going to clean up the image. By what I mean by cleaning up is there's a lot of like this bit here, there's this stump here, there's this. Look around the edges and clean it up. So I'm going to select J, and that is going to give us our healing brush, our spot healing brush. Select the original layer that we have, and we're just going to zoom in, and then holding space I can move around the image and move around the frame and find bits that I don't necessarily like and get rid of them, because we don't want any distractions. We want to kind of make it as pleasant to the eye as we can, and we don't want the eye moving around the frame, and no, that didn't really work. We didn't want the eye moving around the frame too much. We want to make sure that our main focus is that tree, and that the viewer of this image is looking at that tree and the mystical scene that's behind it. And if you've got odd things like this on the edges of your frames, it's kind of really impossible to get rid of when you're at the scene. I'm being very picky now. I wouldn't normally be this picky, but just for the sake of the tutorial, get rid of little things like that. Look around the edges, we've got this odd branch creeping into the frame here. We could get rid of that, like so. Let's see what Photoshop does with this. Not bad. That was a bit of a mistake. There we go. And then Control Z to go back on yourselves if you do make a mistake. Get rid of these white bits up in the sky. A little bit distracting. Maybe that bit there too. I'm being very, very picky here. But it's good to be picky because it can perfect your art, if you like. The pickier you are. But can also actually go the other way and not look as good. But I'm just tidying up, that didn't work. I'm just tidying up the frame so that it looks a bit more pleasing to the eye. And something like that will do. So we're going to pop out, zoom all the way out, just check our edges once more, have a little look around, make sure there's nothing creeping in that we don't like, make sure that the sharpness on the tree is nice and sharp, which it is. We've applied that Gaussian blur so the background is now blurred out beautifully. We've painted through to make sure that it's not affecting the main tree that we focused on because we didn't want it in there, and we've got rid of it in the foreground. We've cleaned up our image, we've added another levels to bring through the blacks and added some more contrast, and just like that we are done. I would then select both layers, flatten the image, and that is your finished image. So I hope you guys have liked this one and a little insight into how I would normally edit my woodland images, or this image in particular actually. I did post a black and white version of this on my Instagram feed the other day actually, and I think I do actually prefer the colour version. Black and white kind of loses that mystical feel. I like that blue mist in the background, I like the dark oranges and the browns in the bark, and it really, really does look nice. So I hope this has been of use to some of you guys out there. I hope you can try and apply this technique into your woodland images, because woodland photography can be very, very difficult, and as soon as I learned how to do the Orton effect, most of my woodland images then started to come to life, and I could really see the love and the passion that people have for woodland photography. So give it a go, let us know down in the comments your thoughts, and I will see you guys in the next one.